If you ever go to build this model, the first thing you should do is throw the instructions in the bin. G'day everyone, welcome to the build of Pocher's gigantic 1/8 scale Lotus. We'll take this box of over 470 parts and turn it into this beautiful replica of Emerson Fittipaldi's 1972 British Grand Prix winner, the black and gold John Player Special. We'll cover what I did to build this example, including extra detail the kit omits, plus tips and advice that will prevent mistakes and frustration if you're ever going to build one yourself. Now, I was serious about binning the kit instructions. The 44-page booklet that comes with the kit has lots of errors, so you need to jump online and download the revised instructions that Pocher has published to address the mistakes, though they haven't fixed all of them. Secondly, the screwdriver they supply is totally inadequate. You're going to need good quality Phillips head screwdrivers with decent handles because you will need far more leverage than what you're going to get out of this piece of rubbish. Thirdly, and this could be a major problem for many builders, is desk space. The model takes up a lot of room, and my workspace was insufficient to also be able to lay out the various trays, bags, and sprues of parts. Luckily for me, I was able to spread all the components out on a table in another room, but it did mean many trips back and forth picking the parts for each step. Assembly begins with the engine. Beautifully cast and painted pieces build up the block, oil pumps and so on. These are mostly screwed together with the tiny screws supplied in the kit, but the holes to accept the screws are untapped. They have no thread, so it's difficult to get the screws in as they're also cutting a thread. I'd recommend tapping each hole in the part before doing the assembly. Some people use a micro tap for this, but I found using the kit screws with just a touch of oil as a cutting lubricant, plus a good screwdriver and a heavy hand, did the job fine. Another issue with many of the holes, they're not manufactured deep enough and the screws bottom out before the part's tight. I used a small drill and pin vise to deepen the holes a little, but all this extra drilling and tapping really blows out the build time. Anyway, the rocker covers and exhausts are pre-painted. Sliding the collector in place to hold the header pipes helps with the alignment when screwing each pipe to the engine. Keep in mind the Cosworth engine is asymmetrical, so inspect the instructions carefully. Those two small pipes share the same part number, but they're a different length. You can also see here the effect that panel line wash has on a part. The fuel injection and other parts of the block come together. And then it's on to the gearbox, and this is where I experienced probably the really only casting issue. There was a burr on one of the halves of the gearbox that had to be filed clean so that the two casing halves could come together cleanly. Onto the rear suspension, and I was having some trouble dry fitting a few of the components when I discovered this. The crossmember was bent, so I had to flatten that out. I just did that by hand, and thankfully it didn't snap. As the kit comes, the suspension doesn't operate, but I reckon someone who has metal fabrication skills could make it work because most of the linkages are already free moving. And in the rear, it's just these inoperable torsion bars that lock everything up. The oil tank at the back is two die-cast halves that screw together, and then the cooler and ducting is glued in place. Like all the bodywork in this kit, the ducting is beautifully painted in gloss black and already decorated with the gold logos. Everything lined up fine between the engine and gearbox. Just make sure you've pre-tapped and drilled the mounting holes before you start fitting it together and trying to screw it up tight. Ignition and fuel lines are next. The black tubing provided is very flexible, easy to work with, just a bit of CA glue to hold it onto the various positions, but it's terrible for picking up dust and debris, so make sure your work area is spotless. Unfortunately, this black hose, it's the wrong colour for the fuel line. The braided lines and coloured fittings are kit parts. There are conflicting images of the real car regarding the routing of some of this plumbing, but all the hoses do connect to the correct fittings. Something that's still wrong, even in the revised instructions, is the rubber boots for the CV joint covers. They've got the front and the rear mixed up. The small ones go on the rear axles and the large ones are for the front. I've also added some metal film to replicate the boot clamps. The final piece of the exhaust is metal tubing, which looks really sharp when it's fitted. With this and the rest of the suspension fitted, the back half is basically done. The main structure of the car fits around an inner tub casting, but you really need to squeeze a few of these major components together to get the mounting holes to line up for the screws. But once you do that, you end up with a nice solid straight structure. I was concerned about this gap between the two halves, so I grabbed the cockpits around to test fit, and the mounting pegs on that lined up perfectly with the holes in the chassis, so I just left this as it is. A pre-painted metal subframe has all of the front end components, suspension, drive shafts, etc. attached to it, and then this then gets screwed to the chassis. Nice little touch, the pedals operate and they use a small spring behind each pedal to provide tension, and I've just put some wash on the foot pads just to show up the detail. The steering rack was a tight fit, but once it was in, this whole assembly was a perfect fit to the chassis, but again, some of the holes needed to be drilled deeper so that the screws could tighten up fully. The top panel over the footwell didn't fit initially, so a bit of filing on the chassis and also on the part itself meant that could then sit down into position and be screwed into place. The kit includes a pre-painted fire bottle, but once the seat goes in, none of the nozzle or the line detail can be seen, so I didn't bother to detail this any further. There's a complex bunch of filters, fittings and fuel lines behind the cockpit, but a lot of these tubes don't find their homes until the engine gets attached. The seat lining is made of rubber and it's a really nice fit into the cockpit. And then on to the seat belts. Oh, the seat belts. Pocher doesn't provide enough material to make the belts as per their own instructions, but I think they've got it wrong anyway. The kit includes two different widths of material. I've used the wider material for the shoulder and the hip straps and the thinner material for the crotch straps, which I've also created some loops on the ends because the buckle eyes have to feed through those when the belts get done up. The shoulder straps should be two pieces on each end of the buckle with some leftover for a pull down for adjustment. But there wasn't enough material supplied to do that, so I've just fed it all the way through the buckle, so it looks okay at a glance, but it's not correct. Using plenty of softener, the waterslide decals, which is the logo and the stitching, they went down really well on the belts. Just a warning about the belt material, when you cut it, the material frays real bad real quick, but a tiny drop of CA glue on the end holds it all together. The model has to be turned upside down to fit the engine. I just used some foam blocks on the desk to lift the model and support it so that none of the parts that are on the top of the model, which are now underneath, so that they don't get damaged. There are a lot of parts that need to align all at once here when fitting the engine, so just bring it together slowly, bit by bit, and you should find that it actually all lined up really fine. You can also fit the bottom panel of the chassis at this point. The instructions don't call for that until the very end, but there's no reason to wait. You could fit it now while the model's upside down, and it also adds strength and rigidity to the entire assembly. The headrest is a soft rubber pad that glues to the bodywork, which fits inside the rollover bar, which itself is a combination of screw and gluing to the chassis. The dashboard requires the gauge bodies and the lenses and the bezels to be fitted. The front face is pre-decorated with all of that yellow lettering and the red fire ring. And I have applied a little bit of chrome paint to a few of the toggle switches just so that some of them look a bit different. The back of the dash was rather sparse, so I've painted the mounting brackets for the gauges and added wires and cables which have been tied together and routed down the left side of the cockpit, which is where they went on the real car. Once the nose frame is fitted, and that's assembled from a few different parts, the lower half of the nose cone can go on. And interestingly, this bottom half, it's plastic, but the wings and the top cover are metal that again is already pre-painted and pre-decorated. The top cover is designed to be screwed in place, but that covers up all of the detail that you're seeing here. So we've just sat it on top and that's easily removed if you do want to see the detail that's underneath. The rear wing is also a mix of plastic and metal components, and these two metal struts are actually telescopic and can be adjusted to crank the wing angle up or down. When it comes to tyres, as you've probably seen in my other builds, I like to scuff the tread surface and it gets rid of the moulding line, and I just prefer that type of finish. But these tyres are made of a pretty hard material, and when I tested on the inside of the bead, the scratches and the colour change really stood out too much, so I just left the tread surface as it was manufactured. The rims are multi-piece, CA glued together, and then the tyres are popped on afterwards. But for this to happen, the tyres need to be heated up to make them flexible. So I boiled the kettle right, and submerged them in hot water, which allowed them enough flexibility for them to pop over the rims. The tyres do have tread depth slots, the Firestone branding and some other writing embossed on the sidewall, but none of this requires painting for the British Grand Prix version. And then finally the windshield is fixed to the cockpit surround with some crystal clear, and the wheels are fitted. The kit includes knockoff spinners that secure the fronts in place, and there's a special tool for the rear because the rear wheel nuts are actually recessed quite deeply in the rim. All up, it's almost 3 kilograms fully assembled, so this is the heaviest model I've built so far. And if you're going to put this on display, make sure you've got a good strong shelf. Now, for a kit that's designed to basically just be assembled, this model is not necessarily just a straightforward assembly build. I think the instructions lack clarity around the assembly sequence of parts within a step. You really need to study the instructions and the pieces, otherwise you'll find yourself having to remove a part to fit the next. Not a big issue if it's a screw-on part, but if it's a big issue if it's a glued part. As you can see, the end result looks awesome, but there is plenty of scope to go nuts on improving the finish and the detail. Most of the parts have visible seam lines, so removing those and then you'd have to repaint the parts, or you could even use the natural metal finish for quite a few of them. That would result in a sharper model, but that's a lot of extra work and time, and the owner was happy for this build to just go basically as an out-of-box. There's also all those visible screw heads, something I know bugs a lot of kit builders. I learned of the Paul Koo detail set after this build, so that could be an option if anyone wants to go all in on the realism side of things. I don't think that'd really impact the appearance when viewing the model from a few feet away in a display cabinet, but certainly it would lift the model to another level. Similar thing with the painting and colours. A few of the engine parts are actually supplied in the wrong colour. It doesn't really impact the overall look and presence of the model, but as it's supplied, technically it's not factually correct. As far as extra detail that I added, there's mirror film applied to various pieces, particularly on some of these mounting straps, just to differentiate the detail. I've also hand painted a lot of the rod ends and the locking nuts in the suspension and clevises and those sorts of things, and I think that really improves the look overall for not a lot of extra work. I've also picked out the brake lines in the front calipers. I mentioned the foil strips on the CV boots, wiring of the instrumentation and the switches on the back of the dashboard. And of course, panel line wash is used in a lot of areas, partly to dull down some of the parts and also to pick out the detail. Despite the high level of engineering and research that's clearly gone into this kit, it amazes me there are a few silly errors in its execution, like not having enough seatbelt material in the kit, the wrong colour for the fuel line, instructions that still have mistakes, and a major engineering overlook, screw holes that are not deep enough for the screws. Anyway, the end result does look good. The full build has been documented on my website. It includes extra pictures, a little bit more detail, and the link is in the description. Cheers.